Hi, Fox. Something has gone mainstream when the supply chain attacks start. So I quickly want to talk about this very interesting and pretty clever software supply chain attack on an MCP server. Striker.ai published this report, and they're the ones who found this attack. So what happened? There was an existing MCP server that exported your Aura Ring health data. Now, the important thing to note is that this was one of those MCP servers that you download and run locally. This was the original MCP server. It was actually written by an OpenAI engineer who wanted to get his Aura Ring health data into an LLM. And so he has code for this on this GitHub repo. And the way you invoke this MCP server is by putting it into your MCP config for Claude or Codex or any LLM. And this is in Python, so you can run it via UVX. But the way it runs is that it's actually downloading the code for the MCP server and running it locally. And then your LLM is talking to this local MCP server. So that's fine. This original MCP server was fine. But the attacker, what they did was they cloned this MCP server. So this new MCP server is a fork of the original innocuous MCP server. And then after forking and cloning this MCP server, they did a ton of social engineering to have other people fork it and also star this repo so that it looked like a legit repo. And then people started using this forked MCP server, and this happened over a period of months. So this was an attack that took a while to cook up and to actually operationalize. And after this repo built up all the trappings of looking like a legitimate repo with all the social signals like stars and forks and all that stuff, then the attacker went and added the Trojan horse, the attack part. And the attack wasn't even in the code exactly, it was actually in the downloadable binary or the downloadable release for the MCP server. And then finally, the last element was with things like this. People typically find these MCP servers in some sort of a registry. They went and submitted this to a popular MCP registry called MCP Market. And what did the payload do? So the payload went and looked in the user's data and configuration directories, and it tried to steal keys and passwords and credentials and tokens. So this is an interesting wake-up call, but the fundamental lesson remains the same. An MCP server, after all, is untrusted code that you are bringing into your security boundary and executing, especially MCP servers that you download and run locally. Now, the risk from hosted remote MCP servers might actually be much lower because, say, Sentry has an MCP server that is hosted on their own domain, say mcp.sentry.com, or if Atlassian has an MCP server that is hosted on mcp.atlassian.com. So that particular company, Sentry or Atlassian, they are taking responsibility for the security of this MCP server because they're hosting and running it, and hopefully they've done a bunch of checks and vetting on their end. It is, after all, software that they're shipping, but remotely, like a SaaS. But MCP servers that you download and install, you have to check. And this really reminds me of all these NPM and Node supply chain incidents that happened in the last few years where someone would go and poison an NPM package. Either they would take over a popular one or pretend to be a maintainer for a long time and then sneak in a binary that was malicious into the downloadable package, not even the source code, so it was harder to discover. The event stream incident from a few years ago was a popular one. But there's big similarities between these two things because, after all, they're supply chain vulnerabilities. You have a big registry that everyone downloads packages from. You have code that you necessarily haven't vetted that you're downloading and incorporating into your setup. So it's very similar to all these Node and NPM or even PyPy supply chain attacks. So I thought that was interesting. On the one side, it is a big wake-up call to be careful about what MCPs you're pulling down. It is, after all, untrusted code. And on the bright side, it kind of says that MCP is now getting popular and mainstream enough that it is becoming a target for exploitation. Anyway, I'll leave a link to this below and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.